Hello. I'm going to continue now my read through of my book, The Baha'i Faith, A Short History. We're still on the section on the Bābī religion, and we've reached chapter 4, Conflict and Collapse, 1848-1853. As before, I've divided this into two separate videos for ease of recording. So, the chapter consists of 4 sections. The radicalization of Babism, the beginnings of conflict at Abbasi, the events of 1850, and finally, collapse. The radicalization of Babism. There is an evident contrast between the first few years of the Bābī movement's development and its emergence as an essentially new religion in 1848. The theological focus of this change was the Bab's advancement of his higher claims, but this represented only part of a general radicalization of the movement. Other aspects of this process were changes in internal Bābī organization, the interactive growth of anti-Bābī and Bābī militancy, and the Bab's own alienation from the Qajar regime. These, by the way, are photographs of the 2 fortresses in which the Bab was imprisoned in Azerbaijan. On the left we have Marku, which is up near the Ottoman and Russian borders, and then on the right we have Chehvik, which is near the town of Urumiyeh. So, with the Bab isolated in Marku and Chehvik, contact between him and his followers became more difficult. Communications were still maintained, but the leading disciples increasingly played a dominant role in the direction of the movement. The holding of the Badasht conference represented an element of this. This situation received theological legitimacy with the doctrine that the letters of the living represented the return, Raja, of the holy figures of Shi'ism, and more particularly from the charismatic authority accorded to the 3 leading disciples, Mullah Hussein Bushrui, Tahareh, and Qudus, who came to be seen as expressing aspects of the Bab's Messianic role. Of the 3, Mullah Hussein was formally accorded the position of the Bab's deputy, the Bab, but eventually it was Qudus who came to be regarded as a second point of revelation to the Bab. Militancy was always implicit in the Bābī movement, insofar as it expressed traditional Islamic Messianic expectations, according to which the Mahdi would lead the faithful in a holy war to establish his kingdom of justice. The theoretical position here was quite complex. In his early writings, the Bab, speaking as or for the Mahdi, referred to the approaching jihad. In the event, however, the jihad was never called, and the Bab instead directed his disciples to promulgate his message peacefully, whilst he himself sought to gain the allegiance of the Shah. Later doctrine was different. According to the Bayan, it would be future Bābī kings who would lead the jihad. Again, this messianic charge, with its implications of militancy, was combined with the pietism and the complex esotericism of the Bab's teachings. The Babis were never simple millenarians. There were also differences of approach among the Babis, some evidently being more inclined towards militancy than others. The confrontation between Tahareh and Qudus at Badasht reflected these differences. The context of events was also crucial. The growth of more militant attitudes was interactive. As clerical opposition to the Babis increased, so did the occurrence of violent, clerically inspired assaults on Bābī missionaries. Initially, these attacks were not resisted by the Babis, but they're likely to have contributed to a hardening of Bābī attitudes towards their opponents. which in turn made resistance more likely, whilst the carrying of weapons for defense increased the potential for violent confrontation. As the Bābī movement expanded, and particularly as it made significant inroads into particular urban populations, it necessarily entered into the complex and frequently violent networks of communal rivalries and partisan politics, in which religious differences might exacerbate existing antagonisms. This had already occurred in the case of Shi'ism. It also happened at a personal level, where the previous relationships between individual prominent Babis and others had a bearing on their role as Babis. These points are relevant to events in Tahareh's home city of Qazvin in 1847, which served to define the hostility between the opponents of Babism and the Babis. The religious situation in Qazvin was already tense when Tahareh returned to the city at her family's insistence in the summer of 1847. The dominant cleric in the city was her uncle and father-in-law, Haji Mullah Muhammad Taqi Barakani, who was already a fierce and powerful opponent of Shi'ism. Tahareh's expulsion from Iraq in March 1847 had not lessened her fervour, and in her home city she both proclaimed the Bab's cause and openly broke with her Orthodox Shi'i husband, regarding him as an unbeliever. These actions further antagonized her uncle, who was unable to tolerate yet further heterodoxy. There was increasing tension between the two parties, and violent attacks were made on the Babis. Muhammad Taqi was then murdered by a sheikh with Babi sympathies. Although denying complicity, the Qazvin Babis as a group were blamed for the murder, and extensive persecution began, with several of the Babis being killed. Throughout Iran, the clerical view of Babism as a dangerous heresy was reinforced by these events, while many Babis became increasingly assertive and militant in their attitudes. The final element in the radicalization of Babism was the Bab's changing attitude towards the Qajar regime. It was only after the Tabriz trial that he seemed finally to abandon hope that Muhammad Shah would eventually come to his assistance. The implications of this change are evident in the denunciatory letters that he addressed to the Shah and his chief minister after the trial. In these sermons of wrath, Aqqasi is cursed and condemned as an apostate and as Satan. The Shah, too, is reproved for his actions towards the Bab, and warned that there remained but little time for him to make amends. Those who opposed the Bab are consigned to hell. This, by the way, is a portrait of Muhammad Shah Qajar and Haji Mirza Qasi. So now we turn to the situation in 1848. The likelihood of conflict between the Babis and their opponents had greatly increased by the summer of 1848. The Babis were now well established in many parts of Iran, and their Messianic expectations had been heightened by the Bab's declaration of Mahdihood. Clerical attitudes were now generally hostile, and the Babis became increasingly beleaguered. Within the movement, a spirit of militancy was replacing earlier caution. The climax to these developments came in July 1848, when Mullah Hussein, at the Bab's instructions, raised the Black Standard, which proclaimed the advent of the Mahdi. From the northeastern province of Khorasan, he proceeded westward with a growing body of several hundred armed followers. The intentions of Mullah Hussein and his companions remain a subject of speculation. Later Muslim writers were in no doubt that the Babis' march from Khorasan was a consciously revolutionary act. But to discuss it in purely political terms is undoubtedly misleading. The desire to establish a Messianic kingdom was obviously a political objective, but the Babis' actions suggest religious fervour, not political calculation. Baha'i accounts, by contrast, state that Mullah Hussein's purpose was simply to assist Qudus, then under house arrest in the Caspian province of Mazandaran, but this leaves unanswered the exact nature of the proposed assistance. Certainly it would have involved securing Qudus's release from captivity, but then what? The Babis' overall plan of action remains unclear. One possibility is to see the march as a messianic proclamation, with the Babis possibly anticipating a widespread popular movement in support of the Bāb, and the subsequent establishment of a Bābī kingdom. The carrying of swords in this context had a symbolic significance as well as defensive value in conditions of increasing civil disorder. Beyond this, the Babis may also have thought of marching on to Marku to secure the Bāb's release, by force if necessary, but this is only conjectural. I'll pause there and continue the rest of this chapter next week. As before, I'll add some references to more detailed academic sources below. Note that I've started posting review questions for each chapter. The questions for this chapter will be posted next week. Thank you for listening. If you like these videos, you're welcome to subscribe to my channel. I will try to answer any questions you may have in a future video. By the way, those who want to support the development of the channel can do so through Patreon or PayPal. I'll give details below the video. You can also click the like button so that I can get an idea of which videos are of greatest interest to viewers. Have a good day.